I'm Sean Haney, and this is Real Ag on the Weekend. Let's get real and get connected with the week that was in Canadian agriculture. Real Ag on the Weekend starts now.
Hello and welcome to Real Ag on the Weekend here on CJME 980 Regina and CKOM 650 Saskatoon. I am your host, Lindsay Smith, for this week and next, while your regular host, Sean Haney, is traveling in Germany to Agritechnica. Before we dive into today's show, I just wanted to, of course, acknowledge that today is Remembrance Day, November 11th. And I will say that one of the things I always encourage every Canadian to do at some point in their lifetime, if they can, is to attend the Remembrance Day ceremonies in Ottawa at least once in your lifetime. I've had the honor of being able to be there. It is absolutely moving. It is an incredible ceremony, and I encourage each and every one of you, at some point, if you can, try to get to that ceremony. There's a couple things I wanted to cover before we get into some of the interviews I've got lined up for this week. It's been a busy one, certainly on the news front, and we did hear this week a lot of action on Bill C-234. So as a quick update, this is the bill. It's a private member's bill that was brought forward in the House of Commons that would exempt fuel used for grain drying and barn heating and cooling from the carbon tax. And it's a super important one, obviously, for the agriculture industry. It went to the Senate, and if you missed all the fireworks last week, the Senate committee actually tried to amend the bill to remove the exemption on barn heating and cooling. That amendment was defeated, so that means the bill goes back to the House of Commons after third reading, as it was presented to the Senate. So there was certainly some stress happening there for those who want to see this bill move forward as is. So we'll keep tabs on when Bill C-234 ends up back in the House of Commons and whether or not we see that pass quickly, because of course, here we are in the beginning of winter. Barn heating bills and, of course, those grain drying bills really stack up, and adding a carbon tax on top of that, of course, really stings. So we'll see where that ends up. We also saw, and certainly a reflection of the kind of year that it was for Saskatchewan, crop insurance has come out with some initial numbers of the 2023 crop, and Saskatchewan Crop Insurance estimates that total payouts may reach $1.85 billion plus for this year. So total crop insurance claim payouts, of course, not done yet, but just the initial 30% that's been paid out already is forecasting that it may reach as high as $1.85 billion. And that's, of course, in addition to some other things. So this is, of course, your reminder, though, that your deadline for the detailed net production and registering a claim for crop insurance is November 15th. So that is coming up quickly. So this is your reminder to do so. We, of course, do have some movement on the agro-recovery program finally. So it was Agri-Recovery has been named for 2023 the Canada-Saskatchewan Feed Program. There will be $77 million of federal dollars and $70 million of provincial dollars put together into that program. And you can, of course, submit an application and find out if you're eligible for part of that program if you head on over to SCIC.ca and look it up there. All right. Okay. There's of course a couple other things that happened this week that I thought were kind of cool. If you had been paying attention to realagriculture.com, you would have heard Peggy Bruckfeld. She's the chair of the Canadian Agricultural Human Resource Council, and they released a report that pegs the losses of vacant jobs in agriculture, and this is just at the primary level, at $3.5 billion in 2022. And realistically, it begs the question, does agriculture have a perception problem when it comes to people who are looking for new careers, new jobs? And the answer is probably yes. So related to that this week, Ag in the Classroom Canada, so Agriculture in the Classroom Canada, came out with a new program, and it's hashtag #IamAg. And so this is a promotional campaign that is looking to try and spread the word across social media that agriculture is more than just farming, but also that farming is super cool, but that there are so many other jobs within agriculture that people might not necessarily think about or consider when they're choosing their career, when they're choosing going to college or university, or even if they're already graduated, how they apply those skills. And of course, those of us in agriculture all know that you could go into the banking sector, you could go into marketing, you could go into finance. There's so many different things that you could be doing that support the agriculture industry and are a key part of the entire value chain. And we just don't necessarily see the same kind of interest from outside the industry in some of these jobs. But we also know that it is costing our sector billions to not have talented people on the farm and all the way through the value chain. And I had someone, when we had this conversation on realagriculture.com, there was a couple people that got in touch with us, and one that shared, we really have to start thinking more creatively about how we attract more people, new talent, and potentially the kinds of jobs we offer within the agriculture sector. And part of that is because, let's face it, there's not as many farm kids out there that, come from the farming background, that understand the ins and outs of the busy season. And so we might have to add some flexibility into some of the jobs that don't exist. And so I would love your feedback on that. My email address is lsmith@realagriculture.com, or you can call that feedback line 1-855-776-6147. I've got a great show lined up for today. We're going to talk the red and green lentil markets, what's happening there with Chuck Penner. We're going to hear from Federal Agriculture Minister Lawrence MacAulay as well on a couple of key topics. And Mr. Bill Greuel with Protein Industries Canada is going to take us through the roadmap to $25 billion right after this.
There's a reason we call it the Corn School. Videos on everything from planter setup, weed control, field trial results, yield strategies, and so much more. The Corn School on realagriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF, Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from realagriculture.com, or as a podcast from your favorite streaming service. Download the latest podcast today.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At realagriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit realagriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit realagriculture.com/subscribe today.
Welcome back to Real Ag Radio here on CJME 980 and CKOM 650. I am your host, Lindsay Smith, and it is Remembrance Day. And so happy to be here with you. This segment is brought to you by MNP. Seeking professional advice for your farm or business? MNP's team of agricultural specialists cover it all, from business planning and tax guidance to financial projections, farm succession, and risk management. Visit mmp.ca to connect with the experts. All right. Well, if you missed it, this week there was a pretty huge announcement from Protein Industries Canada. And we've decided that this bears some digging into, because this is a pretty huge commitment that the plant protein industry has made into growing the sector. And so without further ado, let's hear from CEO of Protein Industries Canada, Bill Greuel. Welcome here, Bill.
Thank you, Lindsay. It's great to be on.
All right. So your organization has some pretty exciting news, a pretty lofty goal, in fact, with the roadmap to $25 billion. What is this all about?
Yeah. So, as an organization, what we do, Lindsay, is we manage an innovation investment fund aimed at de-risking innovation to grow Canada's plant-based food, feed, and ingredient sector. But over the course of the last 5 years that we've been doing that, we've realized that our companies need more than just de-risking of innovation or support from us for doing the work that they do. And so we set out to really talk to our members and learn deeply what it is that they need. And the result of that is the road to $25 billion. So this is a larger strategic plan for the growth of the sector. You could think about it in terms of industrial policy or economic policy. These are the things that we need to do to drive forward and increase the value-added agriculture sector in Canada to $25 billion of annual revenue.
Now, is there a time where you're saying here's where we want to get to that $25 billion, or is it here's the steps? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. And so we think we can achieve this goal by 2035. So that's, when we started this project, it was a 15-year horizon. We're down to a little bit less than that. But, the reason we put a time horizon on this is there's a lot of countries out there vying for investment in ingredient manufacturing, putting really big incentives ahead for companies to offset the cost of construction and being very aggressive in terms of attracting investment infrastructure in ingredient manufacturing. So we believe there's a sense of urgency to build this out for Canada, and that's partly why we've put the time horizon at 2035. Well,
and as they say, goals without deadlines are just dreams, right? So this is pretty important. Yeah, you need to have some sort of line in the sand that you're working towards. Now, walk us through. We will share, so any of you who want to head on over to realagriculture.com, we are going to share a link to the actual graphic. You've got some great graphics that go along with this, a report that sort of lays this all out. But there's several points along this road to 25 billion and that are outlined. What do you think are perhaps the most immediate ones that need addressed?
Yeah, I think maybe I'll take a step back and just, one of the things we did this last week, we spent, 3 days in Ottawa talking to senior government officials and both elected and senior government officials. And our top line goal there was, rolling out the roadmap, but it was really about making the case that value-added agriculture in the agriculture sector is something that can be a transformational sector of growth for the economy. We all in Western Canada watch with great interest as the federal government invests in electric vehicle battery manufacturing. I'm not going to question whether that's a good or bad investment, but at the same time, we see value-added agriculture as a sector that can deliver as much to Canada's economy as the EV batteries. And here's a sector that can deliver economic growth in spite of what's happening on a global basis. We're seeing increased global competition. We're seeing increased geopolitical tension. We're seeing population growth and climate change. So here's a sector that can grow in spite of all the things that are happening in the world today. And so that was the backdrop for the conversation in Ottawa. It seems to be resonating very well. But to your specific question, what we did with officials and what we're trying to do with the roadmap is point to, what are the 5 areas that we need to address in order to grow this sector to $25 billion of annual revenue. So we can pick those apart, but I mean, that's kind of the backdrop to the roadmap and why we were in Ottawa, just to make that case that, hey, don't forget about agriculture. It's a growth sector for the economy.
So really good point, right? And that I think sometimes as an industry, we get quite frustrated actually when we see perhaps, a lot of government backing or a lot of money flowing into potentially a development or a sector where, when we sort of stand back and say, we can do great things too. You need to believe in us. So that very much, how you did mention it was, received. How well received was that? Do the powers that be in Ottawa recognize the potential of this sector, do you think?
Yeah. So I've been knocking around this for a long time in things like the federal, provincial, territorial work I used to do with the Ministry of Agriculture in my job here at Protein Industries Canada. I think the winds are changing a little bit in Ottawa. I think that the powers that be are recognizing that this is a growth sector of the economy. And we're getting more traction with people at ISED. We had an opportunity to meet with senior officials at the Department of International Trade. We met with finance. We even had time with the Prime Minister's office, their strategic lead on agriculture and food. I do think the mood and the recognition is changing, that agriculture is on the radar more than it's ever been in my career.
Now, looking at the milestones along this road to 25 billion, you've got, points like new development for local communities and opportunities for farmers to sell crops closer to home. Obviously, value add processing is a key part of this. You're talking 10 to 15 new plants across Canada. That's significant. How is that all going to happen? Yeah.
Yeah. So to your point, it is significant. And I said in my LinkedIn post on this, I don't think we have all the answers in this roadmap. It's going to take a lot of collaboration. But in order to drive at that level of value-added processing in Canada, which is an incremental 2 to 2.5 million metric tons, no small feat, because that's a capital requirement of $7 to $9 billion. We think there's really 5 things that we need to do, not just as Protein Industries Canada, but as a sector, in order to drive forward the growth in value-added processing. We really need to take a hard look at innovation policy in Canada and how it is we're funding and supporting the commercialization of Canadian IP. We think we need to do a lot of work around creating enabling regulations. And that sounds like a broken record. I know that everybody who issues a report like this in the agriculture sector talks about it. I think we've got a pretty good plan and some specific regulations that need addressing. We need to invest in critical infrastructure in this country. Again, that's a pretty common theme when you talk about growth of the agriculture sector. But for value-added processing, there's some very specific things that we need around creating toll processing and building out our scale-up infrastructure for ingredient manufacturing. We think there's a real need for market development. This is an export play for us in Canada, and we need to be out there ensuring that countries in Europe, in the U.S., and in Asia really understand the value proposition that our ingredients are bringing. And finally, and probably the biggest one, Lindsay, is that we need to figure out ways of incentivizing and unlocking private sector capital into this sector, because as I say, this is not a small investment. This is not a venture capital play. This is long-term, patient institutional capital that we need to grow out ingredient manufacturing in the country.
Now, the roadmap certainly reaches far beyond Saskatchewan. Absolutely. And as you say, critical infrastructure, we need to be talking about processing. We have processing outside of Saskatchewan as well. But when we think plant protein, obviously Saskatchewan is the home of our pulse industry, and so is going to be so important to delivering on this. What do you think this could mean for Saskatchewan itself?
Yeah, well, I think for a province like where I'm in, we've often talked about the fact that we have, 40% of Canada's farmland, and that should translate into a processing industry. But the reality is, when companies are looking at making a siting decision around where to build infrastructure, having access to the raw commodity is only one component. There's a lot of other things that they need in order to be successful. And so what can it mean for Saskatchewan? I think if the provincial governments here, and this probably is true for all provincial governments, can do a better job of coordinating with the federal government on creating a suite of incentives that drive at attracting capital and investment, it could mean significant value to any province that takes ownership of this. And, we've got some thoughts and ideas around what that might be. And again, I know governments don't like to hear incentives and you need to put money on the table, but the reality is with the Inflation Reduction Act, the creation of opportunity zones in the U.S., it's really competitive out there, and we need to get our head around exactly what that means. And so I might not be answering exactly your question. I'm maybe going to solutioning as to how we can drive that capital investment in the prairie provinces. But maybe to bring it back to your question, I think this can mean, if we believe the industry is worth $25 billion by 2035, certainly for the provinces that get ingredient manufacturing right, that's billions of dollars of revenue created in the provinces where commodities are produced.
Absolutely. All right. The website is theroadto25billion.ca. If you want to look at more, you can download the roadmap and dig into it. Bill Greuel with Protein Industries Canada, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Lindy. Always great to chat.
We're going to take a quick break, and I'll be back with more Real Ag on the Weekend right after this.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on realagriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
The next generation is the future of agriculture, but how do we launch from one role to leading? From succession planning and family dynamics to understanding finances and making the tough calls to discovering paths others have taken all through agriculture, the Successors Podcast covers it all. Tune in with me, your host, Kara Oosterhuis, simply by searching The Successors on your favorite podcast platform, or you can find it by visiting www.realagriculture.com.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on realagriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on realagriculture.com. Brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
Welcome back to Real Ag on the Weekend. I am your host, Lindsay Smith, here on CJME 980 and CKOM 650. It was certainly a busy week for our Federal Minister of Agriculture, Lawrence MacAulay. And yes, if you missed it, this is Minister MacAulay's second go at being the Federal Ag Minister. And he just got back from a trip over to Vietnam and in the Asia-Pacific region, where, of course, Canada will be setting up a new office to facilitate trade in the region. But, of course, we wanted to talk to Minister MacAulay about several things that are happening right now. So our own Kelvin Hepner sat down with the minister and covered several topics. So if you want to hear the entire interview, head on over to realagriculture.com. But I pulled out a snippet here that tackles agri-recovery, so the discussion about that, because of course Saskatchewan did trigger the agri-recovery program, but didn't necessarily get all that they were hoping for in that deal. So Calvin has some questions about that. We also want to know the status of the Sustainable Ag Strategy. This is an overarching strategy that apparently has several groups that have been meeting very often, but we're not really sure what's going to come out of it. And we've got a key question on whether or not there will be cuts to the department. So let's hear now Kelvin Hepner in conversation with Federal Ag Minister Lawrence MacAulay.
Another topic I wanted to ask you about is agri-recovery. Of course, the funds were announced a couple of weeks ago. That's actually where this conversation, this interview, it's been in the works since then. Can you comment on how the agri-recovery program? You mentioned the price of bales in Western Canada. Can you fill us in on how that agri-recovery process came about? Of course, the requests were filed prior to you becoming minister, and you moved into the office. There was a bit of a delay, and some of the provinces have hinted that the funds aren't at the amount that they were originally seeking. Can you speak to how the agri-recovery program for drought in Western Canada came together?
Well, of course, the way it comes together, agri-recovery is part of the business risk programs, and you know very well they're put together with the provinces, territories, and the federal government, and this agreement reached. And, of course, with the disasters, the province puts together with the agricultural sector the problem and the devastation. And they send the papers to Ottawa, and that's a criteria that you must follow in order to, and it's a federal provincial agreement, not just federal, but both. And it's not easy to put these programs together. When I was here previously, we worked at it. But the program, we ended up sending $219 million of federal dollars totally to Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia, and then 40% more of that on provincially on top, which helps. But in the end, farmers end up paying, of course, in the end. But there's no doubt there's a lot of speculation and talk that when we sit down again with the provincial conference, that we look at the business risk management programs and just how they could possibly meet the requirements of farmers better and quicker. And I would certainly be in favor of that.
Do you have any ideas on something that you'd like to see in terms of meeting that expectation or that request?
Well, of course. Calvin, we're talking to the agricultural sector. There's been a number of suggestions. I don't want to be quite simply, we'll sit down if there's a way working with the provinces and territories to put something together that can be done faster. I'd be all for it, and to be more inclusive if it can be. That is because in the end, food is so important, and the production of food is so important.
You and your cabinet colleagues, Minister, were asked to come up with $15 billion in savings earlier this fall. Will your department, will agriculture be affected by this?
Of course, we have to take I think it's a 3% reduction, and we have to find it within the department. What we have to do is make sure it affects very little any of the agricultural programs that are in place. These programs are put in place in order to make sure that we stimulate the agricultural sector, and we want to continue to do that.
Any word on where that 3% will be found?
Well, it's not an easy task, I can assure you that. But that's in fact what we're doing, and that is what my job is, to make sure that we watch carefully that we don't affect the agricultural programs.
All right.
To any great extent. But you're asked to take 3% out, so you have to take 3% out.
We're also coming up on a year since the announcement of the Sustainable Ag Strategy, and since those consultations and meetings started. Our understanding is that that group has been meeting regularly. Where is the process at with the Sustainable Ag Strategy, rolling it out, and the timeline for it?
Well, I can't give you the actual timeline, but the fact is we have, as you know, a good group of people working together, and I've met a number of the organizations since I came back here that are working on that strategy. And of course, what we want to make sure is that, and I firmly believe too, though I didn't put this together, is to make sure it comes from the bottom to the top. That's what is important, that the agricultural sector is on board and they understand fully that there's a problem. Like, there's always problems with what you do, how you do it, how you get there with price on carbon and this type of thing. But the fact is, the agricultural sector realizes that, and we have a great bunch of people sitting down, and what we need, and I suspect we will get, is a strategy that's suitable to the sector in particular. And that's what's so vitally important.
Are you concerned at all that some groups may drop away from the table and not participate anymore?
Well, I hope it does not happen, but it can happen. It might, but all you can do is, we got a problem to deal with. We got a lot of sector representation sitting down, putting this together, and what we need to do is make sure the groups are agreement. And I have to say, with the groups that I've met, there seems to be a lot of agreement, but until we get it together, we have to get it together, and that's simply what we want to do. And I have to admit, with the groups that I met, they also want to get it together.
All right, we'll leave it there. We're going to take a quick break, and I'll be back with more Real Ag on the Weekend right after this. Hi, I'm Lindsay Smith of RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern for The Agronomists, Canada's only live, interactive, agronomy-based show. Each week, we answer your most pressing questions with a rotating panel of agronomists, researchers, and extension staff from across Canada. Join me Monday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn, or head to realagriculture.com/live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on realagriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, realagriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by Pride Seeds, BASF, and Syngenta Canada.
Welcome back to Real Ag on the Weekend here on CJME 980 and CKOM 650. I'm your host, Lindsay Smith, and this segment is brought to you by Co-op. Co-op's Grown with Purpose recognizes how your farm brings sustainability, agronomics, and safety to our food, community, and environment. What you do matters. Make it count. Contact your local Co-op Grow Team member to learn more. All right, we do, of course, need to talk pulse markets. It is that time of year where things start to get interesting on the global stage as far as India's pulse crop, as far as what's happening in other areas. And we are starting to see a few bids for new crop start to pop up. So, of course, we've got to talk pulses, which means we're going to Chuck Penner with Left Field Commodity Research out of Winnipeg, Manitoba.
We kind of had a lot of excitement late in the summer. There was a whole lot of thinking in terms of comparing it to 2021. So there are some guys who had 2, 3, maybe 4 years of drought in a row, and for them it was justified comparing it to 21. But it really wasn't. Well, it was similar for them, but not for the entire crop. Right. And so we had a situation where the markets got really excited early and thinking that it was a repeat of 21, because those were the images on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it now. And so those kind of pictures were being shown and all of those kind of things. And so there was some nervousness about among overseas buyers about how Canadian supplies are going to turn out. And for some pulses, that rally has just kind of continued, and it's been great. But for other ones, it kind of saw a bit of an oomph higher, and then, that's a technical term, by the way, oomph.
Absolutely,
higher.
Yes.
And then from there, it's kind of been pretty mediocre or worse since that initial rise in the market. So it's been a real mixed picture. We've seen what's clearly been demonstrated this year is that there are big differences. You can't just say the lentil market or the pea market, because there are huge differences in those kind of in the demand for those. Essentially, on the production side, you can lump them together, but from a demand side, very, very different situation.
It's a really good point you bring up, of course, is that, a red lentil market is not a green lentil market, and the yellow pea market isn't always a green pea market. So it is a good point that realistically each of these pulse types can have their own market dynamics that you really have to be watching. So of the ones that have rallied and stayed, and the ones that have been not so great, also a technical term, where are we landing right now? So here we are, headed into early winter. Where do things sit with some of these different crop types?
Right. So one of the other things that I forgot to mention is that compared to 21, there are other things outside of our borders that have changed significantly. Mm-hmm. And so what we had was, if we start with, let's say, red lentils, we start with that picture. What we had in 21 was that Canada was still the dominant source of red lentils. Australia was up and coming, but Canada was still the dominant source for red lentils. Fast forward just a couple of years, and Australia is competing very effectively with Canada. And in fact, in the red lentil market this year, the Australian crop is probably going to come in around 1.4, 1.5 million tons, and Canada's is going to be 1 million tons at most. So Australia is actually outproducing us on red lentils now. So that's a different situation than we had in 21. But what we do have for the red lentil market, it took off. Bids got to 40 cents a pound, and there were lots of ideas that momentum was just going to continue higher, again, because we have a short crop in Canada. But it's since then it's kind of turned lower again. So we're hovering around 35, 36 cents. So it kind of did this and then went sideways and then has dropped off again in the last month or so, I would say. Mm-hmm. So that's not a situation though where we have weak demand, because India has been buying lentils at a record pace. It's just a situation where we have additional supplies. So that's kind of the red lentil market looked great and then kind of not, kind of sad trombone kind of a move after that. The green lentil side of the market though has continued to just rally. And a good part of it is our smaller Canadian crop. When it comes to green lentils, really the only two exporters are Canada and a little bit from the U.S. Most of the U.S. stuff goes to food aid. So Canada's really the only show in town. And there won't be fresh supplies until next fall. So we have these tight supplies. So that green lentil market has just continued to rise, take off. And now we have large green lentils. I've seen a couple of bids over 70 cents now, which we're already past the levels that we had during the 21 drought year. Yeah. And now we're getting toward record levels that we had, 2015, 2016, somewhere back then. And small greens have also been rising, and medium greens. So all of those green lentils, once you get to a certain price point, you start to get substitution where the buyers will start to say, okay, we can't, like these large green prices are, I was going to say crazy, but you can't say that anymore. Right. But these prices are very high. And so we're going to start to use some of the smaller greens or medium greens in those applications. And India has been driving a large part of that as well, too. So the crop situation in India is probably the wild card, for the lentil market. So the lentil picture has really greens like this. Sorry, I shouldn't, for the radio crowd.
Way up,
greens are rocketing higher, and reds started to go in that direction, turned sideways, and then have dropped off again. Yep. That doesn't mean that's going to be the picture for the rest of the year, but anyway, that's where we are now.
That's where we are. So a few things on that. I guess, so, if I were planning out my acres for next year, and obviously there's a lot of things that go into that, Aphanomyces being one of them, extended drought being another. Do we get into situations where we overproduce green lentils, or is it really, the sky's the limit as far as what we could be doing here in Canada?
Yeah, that's a really good question. One of the things that we're seeing is that of all of the special crops that we cover, and we cover other ones as well too, and even some of the cereal grains and so on, we don't have new crop prices yet. So like for fall of 24, the exception is large and small green lentils. So we're already seeing bids coming out for those, which tells you a whole lot about the outlook and how nervous overseas buyers are about locking in coverage for next year. Yeah. So, often it used to be when the market was at its peak in 15, 16 and that kind of whatever, we would see new crop bids out this early. Okay. But in the last few years, it's been January, February sometimes for these new crop bids. So that tells you a whole lot about the market. Now, can we overproduce? I suppose we could. A lot of it will depend again on the size of that Indian demand. And there we're already dialing forward the next, to next year's crop. So pretty dicey to kind of predict that. What I would say is that the new crop bids are pretty good, pretty favorable. For those people who really want to, is getting started on some of that new crop pricing already is a good idea. And even though it's not where current bids are, right. But the new crop bids are still mid 40s, maybe even a bit higher for large green lentils, which again, historically, that's a really good place to get started on the pricing. But the crop rotation stuff, the root rot, and I can't say the fancy Latin word or whatever.
Aphanomyces.
Thank you.
Is the bad one. Yeah.
Yes. So those kind of issues will cap acreage, and so I don't know. It's going to be pretty hard to overproduce for the market. And again, aside from the U.S., there really isn't a whole lot of green lentil production out there. So it's kind of up to Canadian farmers to supply that market.
All right, and with that, we round out today's show here of Real Ag on the Weekend. Thank you so much for joining me here. If you'd like to hear more or dig into some of the stories we've covered today, head on over to realagriculture.com, or you can, of course, follow us across social media at Real Agriculture. I will be back next week. I'm covering the show for the next couple of weeks, while Sean Haney, your regular host, is off in Germany at Agritechnica, and I can almost promise that we'll have some of that coverage next week here on the show. Until then, stay safe this weekend. Cheers.